Ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this symposium, as a number of people mentioned, spans a period of 170 years. And it's a long time, even though, as we just heard, the German-American relationship goes back even further. In the lobby of our embassy, there's a panel listing all of the official representatives of the United States of America to the country that we know today as the Federal Republic of Germany. The first official representative was John Quincy Adams, a future president and, of course, son of President John Adams. In 1797, Adams took up his post in Berlin as the minister plenipotentiary to the Kingdom of Prussia. Coincidentally, his first lodgings were at Pariser Platz 1, right beside the embassy. And there's a story that we always tell, I don't know if it's true, but apparently when John Quincy Adams arrived at the Brandenburg Gate, he asked the sentry where he might find his lodgings. The sentry said, "Who are you?" He said, "I represent the United States of America." The sentry said, "Never heard of it." History mirrored the future. In the ensuing 221 years, there have been ministers of the German Empire, ambassadors extraordinary and plenipotentiary to both the German Democratic Republic and the Federal Republic of Germany. Some 64 altogether, if you count the Chargé d'Affaires ad interim, who, like myself and Dr. Bindennagel, have served for more than a year as Chargé. As Chargé d'Affaires, it's been a great honor for me to lead the U.S. mission to Germany over these past almost 14 months as we await the arrival of our next ambassador. Richard Grinnell has been nominated to be the next U.S. ambassador to Germany, but he still needs to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate, as Melinda mentioned, before he can take up that post. But looking at the long list of official representatives and their titles and jurisdictions, I'm reminded of the ties between our peoples over the centuries, through times of change and, of course, times of challenge. Germans were among the very first settlers at Jamestown in 1608. The first permanent German settlement was named Germantown in Pennsylvania. It was founded October 6, 1683. Germantown, now a district of Philadelphia, was the first American community to formally protest the evils of slavery. More Americans can trace their roots to Germany than to any other nation, nearly 1 in 4. And in President Trump's first proclamation in honor of German-American Day, he wrote, quote, "These immigrants and their descendants have changed the trajectory of the United States. On German-American Day, we celebrate their role in helping our country thrive." I have those roots as well, so not a surprise. But why did Germans immigrate in such large numbers to the United States? Many, of course, sought economic opportunity, but also religious and political freedom. That was certainly true for the first settlers. It was also true for those who arrived in the aftermath of the Revolution of 1848. And one of the demands of the 48ers was freedom of the press. The revolution had just been crushed, and a large number of journalists, writers, and publishers were among the movement's supporters who fled Europe. Since we just celebrated International Women's Day a few weeks ago, and the whole month of March is Women's History Month in the United States, I think it's appropriate to tell the story of one of the female journalists of this period, a woman who is, as often is the case, less well known than her male counterparts. Matilda Franziska Anneke is not well known in either Germany or the US. And during Women's History Month, and frankly all year long, we try very hard to shine a light on some of these forgotten stories. For many of her contemporaries in Wisconsin, Matilda Anneke symbolized the true spirit of the 48ers. Soon after she arrived in Milwaukee, in March 1852, Anneke started the first feminist journal published by a woman in America, the Deutsche Frauenzeitung. Overall, in 1890, there were more than 700 German-language publications that existed in the United States. In contrast to Matilda Anneke, Karl Schurz is probably one of the more well-known figures of the time. And on the 100th anniversary of his birth, Gustav-Stresemann, after whom the host institution of today's symposium is named, characterized Karl Schurz in the following way, quote, "Karl Schurz was concerned with profound moral goals that are not restricted to a single nation, but apply to all mankind. The commitment of people like Karl Schurz and Matilda Anneke to these moral goals has been woven into the national fabric of the United States." Some 10,000 48ers immigrated to the US. And that's a relatively small number considering how great their impact is. Although some of them were caricatured as, quote, Latin farmers who supposedly read classical texts while plowing their fields, they were passionate about their cause, and they clearly viewed themselves as having a mission to fulfill. In German American communities across the country, fortyeighters assumed positions of leadership. They sought to realize their ideals by becoming actively involved in the political process. Mathilde Anneke wrote and spoke out in favor of freedom, justice, and equality, especially for blacks and for women. She worked closely with suffragists Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. In her later years, she even started a progressive school for girls in Milwaukee. 1848 was clearly a turning point in Europe, but the 1850s, when the 48ers arrived, was also a turning point in American history. Those years were a prelude to the Civil War. The 48ers played a role in their newfound country during the time of national crisis, and many, like Mathilde Anneke, wrote about slavery. Others worked more directly for the cause. President Lincoln asked many of the 48ers to take on roles in his government. Carl Schurz, of course, one of the more well-known military figures, but there were many others. A couple of years ago, soon after my wife Michelle and I arrived, or better said, we returned to serve in Germany, we visited an exhibit at the Haus der Geschichte in Stuttgart. Frankly, the story of the 1848ers is not well known in the United States. I thought I was fairly well informed about both German history and most aspects of the German-American relationship. But that day, however, I learned a lot. In my opinion, the stories of the 48ers are reminders of the broader partnership between our two nations and the history we share. As I know from my own experience as a high school exchange student in northern Germany, not quite in Bremen, but close, ours is a partnership between people. As a result of that exchange trip, I think it's safe to say I became a diplomat. And in the timeline of German-American history, Americans and Germans often inspire each other in many ways, both personal, as in my case, but also in more sweeping ways. For example, let's talk again about media, one of the goals, the ideals of the 48ers. The United States played a crucial role in the establishment of a free press here in Germany as well, in the early post-World War II history. Germany and the United States derived their strength from constitutions that guarantee freedom of the press and freedom of opinion. The pluralistic nature of our engaged political cultures, our robust economies, and our vibrant societies drives our transatlantic community. And the media plays an enormous role in all of these areas. Earlier this month, I had the opportunity to attend a conference at the Deutsch-Amerikanisches Institute, or DAI, in Heidelberg, to witness how both experienced and budding journalists are addressing the challenges and the opportunities of our time. The title of the conference was Fake News: Enlightenment and Democracy in the Digital News Age. Billed as a tech forum, the event included a hackathon for young journalists who worked with coders and techies to design apps to increase transparency. It also included some media literacy workshops for high school students. There was an illustrious panel of American and German journalists who also joined to talk about the challenges of the digital news age. I thought it was very interesting that 2 out of the 4 US speakers who attended this conference, before they started, pulled out dog-eared copies of the US Constitution to refer to during their talks. Freedom of expression, freedom of the press are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but these rights are also codified in the First Amendment to the US Constitution. First Amendment, part of our Bill of Rights. And in the US, the press is sometimes called the fourth branch of government. An important function of the press is to inform, to help citizens understand the often complicated processes of government, and of course, how to make people aware of how decisions made at the highest level affect them. In the United States, as in Germany, the press fosters active political debate. Leaders committed to democracy may not like having their policies challenged publicly, but they will uphold the right of the press to do so. This was obviously not the case in the aftermath of the Revolution of 1848, when the King of Prussia stated in public that only God, and not the people or any legislative body, could decide upon his crown. Today, in both of our countries, we believe government exists to serve its people. When citizens are at the center of a political system, an independent and free media is indispensable. Respect for a free press, the rule of law, judicial independence, these are all sources of strength and stability. Laws that restrict media operations pose a challenge to international partnerships and, of course, are an impediment to global stability. The open, free flow of information is one of the cornerstones of democracy. That's a fact of history in Germany, in the United States, around the world. But technology also continuously changes the way in which news and way information circulates. That too is a fact of history. And today we live in an era of what experts call hybrid influencing. The range of methods and activities is wide, as we see. For example, how ISIS used the internet to attract followers and financing. We need to be aware of these challenges. The economic realities of the digital age also pose threats to the integrity and independence of a free and a transparent press. Some might say this is due in part to the fact that we're living in what has been described as the, quote, post-factual world in which we live. Oxford Dictionary's 2016 word of the year was post-truth, defined as, quote, relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. This is not a new concept. Opinions often framed by what sort of feels true and what correlates with people's pre-existing set of beliefs, but technology has intensified and accelerated this problem. One thing's certain, we are safer when our governments and our people cooperate to advance shared goals. We are only as strong as our confidence in our values, and that includes, as I'm pretty sure the fortyeighters would have said, confidence in a resilient and reliable media landscape. According to a recent poll, 40% of Americans say they can recall an incident that eroded their confidence in the media, most often one involving a perception of one-sidedness or inaccuracies. But what happens when we as information consumers do not even notice that we're being deceived? The changes we're living through can only amplify the power of those who wish to mislead, but this only makes uncovering and sharing the truth more important. Democratic societies are not infallible, but they are accountable, thanks to an open exchange of ideas and an informed citizenry. And I think that's what Matilda Anneke and Carl Schurz believed. It's what we believe today. That was also the conclusion, by the way, of the journalists who attended that Heidelberg Tech Forum I mentioned. The closing panel of German journalists commented on what they have been able to observe about the state of American journalism, and they talked about whether these trends were applicable to Germany. The observations we took away were threefold. First, the importance of standards and transparency in citing, if not the actual sources, documenting journalistic processes in fair and objective fashions. Second, the importance of applying those standards to investigative journalism, not just in the field of corporate misdoings, as is often the case in Germany, but also to broader social issues. And finally, the potential impact of the slow disappearance of small-town newspapers and media outlets. Again, I can't help but thinking that what Matilda Anneke and Carl Schurz, they would have agreed. So I focused today on the freedom of the press, one of the values that the fortyeighters held dear. However, their influence can also be felt in the structure of civil society all across America, not only in the local newspapers, but also our kindergartens and schools, our city parks and our playgrounds, and our local theaters and orchestras. In my own experience, during my time at Chargé, I've had many opportunities to sit down and talk with German citizens across the spectrum of society and all across this country. There are no easy answers to the tough challenges that we face both at home and on the international stage, but invariably, I do find these discussions to be stimulating and encouraging. Why? Because I think, as Melinda mentioned, you took my line already from my interview, these interactions show that we care deeply about the same issues, even if we sometimes differ in our approach. It also means that we care a lot about this US-German relationship. So for me, learning more about the revolution of 1848 and the fortyeighters since my visit to the Haus der Geschichte in Stuttgart 2 years ago has made me realize even more vividly how much Germans and Americans have in common, in no small measure perhaps because of the significant impact of beliefs, language, values, and traditions of Germans on American culture. I wish I could stay here all day. I think you're going to have a fascinating discussion and learn more about the long-term impact of the revolution of 1848 on our transatlantic relationship. Unfortunately, I'm off to catch a plane to Dusseldorf. I have another commitment. But I wish all of you a great conference, and thank you for your attention. And Melinda, I think I have a little bit of time for a few questions if you'd like.
Yeah.
Thanks.